Jen, we're still seeing a black screen though. Oh, there you go. Now it's up. It might have just been a delay on my part, so sorry, didn't mean to throw you off. So we're here, we're going to talk about the foundation for the Equitable, Healthy, and Zero Carbon Building Initiative. Jen, you're not in slide presentation mode though. I see you looking.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's just not fully in slide presentation mode.
Okay. Oh, I had to open twice. Okay.
And so I asked, and I'm not sure if Sergio is on yet. You can go ahead to the next slide, Jen, please. But our key partners that we've been partnering with for the Zero Cities project, as well as the next phase into E.H.Zero, has been the Grand Rapids 2030 district, which is managed by the U.S. Green Building Council of West Michigan. So if you're on, wave, but Sherry, Jillian, and Wendy are on. And that's the team we've been working with there. I'm not sure if our other key partner has been Sergio Sierra Reyes from the Urban Core Collective. So Sergio, if you've had the opportunity to join us, please wave, but you'll be hearing from him hopefully a little bit later. And yeah, so this is our agenda. So I'm just going to spend some quick time here on why are we doing this. Going to go over some of the key outcomes from Zero Cities project. We'll have a little break to let everybody stretch their legs and get away from the computer for a minute. Jen's going to speak to what is this whole E.H.Zero initiative and provide some details on that. And then really spending the last part of the meeting talking about how can we partner with your department? What are you interested in most in this project? Or how is some of the work that we're doing able to support some of the work that you're doing through this initiative? All right, so why are we doing this work? Jen, you want to go ahead? Oh, there we go. Okay. So really leading with it, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. You can go ahead, Jen, next, because many of you are very familiar with some of this information. But this one in particular, if you're not familiar, why are we focused on buildings? And these two projects we're going to talk about will share why these are focused on buildings, commercial buildings and residential buildings. So people spend 90% of their time inside buildings, homes, places where we work, you go to the gym, school, churches. I mean, think about it. We're inside a lot, and buildings have a significant impact on our financial health, our physical health, mental health. They also have a significant impact on climate change. Buildings and the energy that they consume account for 30% of global carbon emissions. And within an urban city like Grand Rapids, it's even more. And then specifically in this, you're going to hear a lot woven through here about equity and how we are working to lead with equity here. And in this space, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are disproportionately negatively impacted by both indoor and outdoor environmental pollutants and climate change. And they've been underrepresented across the board when it comes to the design or the operation of buildings, as well as the systems and policies that regulate the design, construction, and operation of buildings. And I think you all are aware that we have a nationwide affordable housing crisis that we are also working to address here in Grand Rapids. And so hopefully you're familiar, why lead with equity? If we go to the next one, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but we of course have our strategic plan. Hopefully you're all familiar with. Go ahead, Jen. In our plan, we have our two values of equity and sustainability, right? And within equity, we talk about leveraging our influence to remove and prevent barriers created by systemic and institutional injustice. And then this work really falls within the health and environment priority. So I won't go into this too much, but I would just really encourage you, if you haven't taken some time recently, to reflect and review our equity statement. We really talk about how we are leading with racial equity with respect to a targeted universalism approach. And that's something that we're doing with this work as well. And then really the last sentence here, you'll hear a little bit about, but we are working very hard to engage a broad sector of stakeholders throughout the community because everyone is impacted by buildings. And so we recognize that we need to do this work in partnership with others to get the desired outcomes. Hopefully you're all familiar with our neighborhoods of focus, so I won't spend time here, but we've been very intentional to use our NOFs, as we like to call them, with respect to this work, and you'll hear Sergio and Jen speak a little to our NOFs a little bit later, but this is something that we've really used for purposes of both Zero Cities and E.H.Zero. So this is just the specific strategy in the plan. We have one under our reduce carbon emissions and increase climate resiliency, where we speak to creating and supporting programs and policies that will reduce carbon emissions from the building and transportation sectors throughout the community. So the work that we're talking about today is very focused on the buildings component of this. So these next three, I'm just going to flip through, but if you're not and you haven't had the opportunity to become as familiar with environmental justice, feel free to reach out to myself or Jen. And these are just three reports that I recommend you look at if you want some additional information locally, link up, partnered to really do this environmental justice report on the city of Grand Rapids. On the next slide, University of Michigan came out with a report in 2019. Jen, can you flip to the next one? There you go. 2019, and this really unfortunately showed they measured environmental injustice by census tract across the state of Michigan. And when you look at the top 10 census tracts with the most environmental injustice, 5 of them are in Grand Rapids. And they go into some additional information for how that was determined. And then the last report is more recently, just about a month or so ago, the EPA came out with a new report looking at vulnerable populations with respect to climate change. Here they have it titled Minority, which aligns with BIPOC communities, and why it's so important to be focusing on the needs of our communities of color with respect to climate change work. So a lot of times when people, I think about this work, they oftentimes think about the environmental conservation part. That's really where kind of green buildings originally got started. But what is equally and what we are leading with, even more so than just the environmental green aspect of buildings, is really the human health component. As we mentioned, buildings impact everyone. It also impacts neighborhoods. And then also economic prosperity, recognizing that reduced utility bills help our residents, but it also helps businesses because you have lower tenant vacancies, et cetera. Okay, so that was just kind of our first, why are we doing this work? And now I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over the Zero Cities project, and we'll invite some of our partners to speak a little bit as well, and then we'll take a little break for some questions. So go ahead, Jen. So the Zero Cities project, if you're not familiar, this was something that the city of Grand Rapids got into because Sherry, our partner, really advocated that Grand Rapids be in this with some of these other heavy hitters. So really appreciate her work there. And it started in 2017 before I was hired. And actually Suzanne Soltz, who was our former planning director, also was a big proponent of this project and helping to lead it before I was hired. And it really was a 3-year project with the ultimate intention that cities develop policies to reach, zero net carbon in the building sector by 2050. So what does zero net carbon mean? Well, it means, get your building as energy efficient as you possibly can, and then make sure that you're purchasing the rest of the energy that your building needs to use with renewables. So go ahead to the next one. And there were only 12 cities in the United States that were selected to participate. So there really was a dual goal, both to reduce carbon emissions from the building sector. And I should say this includes commercial buildings and residential buildings, but it specifically excludes industrial buildings and parking structures for purposes of the Zero Cities project. They really wanted it to be focused on the shell of the building. And so those are the buildings that are included, but there's a dual goal of reducing the carbon emissions from buildings while also focusing on equity. And so, these terms that we use, unfortunately, in our climate change world, but equitable decarbonization of the building sector is a way that it's often referred to. And so funding the WEGI Foundation really provided some great funding. And I've mentioned our partners before, but very important here that I'll note that the Urban Core Collective was, reimbursed and compensated to serve as the city's equity partner for this work. So what did we accomplish in these 3 years? We really wrapped up the Zero Cities project. It had some delays because of COVID by the end of 2020. But for me, the most important thing that was developed is collaborative and innovative partnerships that are rooted in equity and environmental justice. Developing a relationship with the Urban Core Collective, we had an outside national organization do a review of our community and make a recommendation to us as to who should serve as our equity partner, and they recommended the Urban Core Collective. And that was my introduction to the Urban Core Collective. I'm extremely grateful for their work and what they're doing in our community, and that they accepted to serve as our equity partner in this space. And that was really one of the big points for me kind of in my professional career of working on environmental sustainability, to really shifting more toward focusing on environmental justice. We're going to talk a little bit, and Sergio is going to share some of the results of the Grand Rapids Equity Assessment Tool, as well as a survey that he and some colleagues helped conduct on residents, or conduct with residents that live in our NOFs. And I'm going to spend a little bit talking about some of the more technical aspects about what kind of buildings do we have in our community, and what are they generating. And then we'll touch on a couple of these others, but the last one, just that last bullet point, is I do want to share with everyone that the city of Grand Rapids has really received national recognition within the sustainability world for leading with equity in building policy development. And that's something that I'm really proud of. And it's something that our partners have been instrumental in helping us achieve. And we've been sharing a lot of this with other cities across the country. Okay, so there's a lot of text on this slide, but there was kind of an original plan, what a lot of other cities did, and then what we did. And the items that are in blue here are all similarities across those. And here we were very fortunate that we had a good relationship with the Green Building Council. So they really took the lead on continuing the commercial sector education and doing a lot of work in that space. And then, as I mentioned, though, we were very different in terms of how intentional we were with equity and bringing on an equity partner. Not every other city did that. And so we also wanted to kind of break down preconceived notions about what residents might want. So we worked on that a little bit differently, that Sergio's going to share some things with. And then for those of you that are familiar with our community collaboration on climate change, it is a completely separate initiative from this. Our partners often share in both, but it's a sister initiative that we hope to work with a little bit, but this project is very separate from the C4, and the C4 is not involved in terms of making the decisions or kind of the day-to-day operations of this. And so I will just say a lot of the other cities kind of threw their hands up and said, well, we don't really know how to do equity. And even though we're supposed to, well, I guess we just really couldn't. And so I'm not embarrassed to say that we ultimately did not achieve the goal of the program, which was develop policies and get policies passed in our city, because we wanted to be very authentic about equity. And, we could have just sat in City Hall and written some policies and attempted to get them passed. But we really wanted to spend a lot more time developing those trusted relationships, lifting up voices of residents who live in our NOF, and building that framework to lead with equity moving forward. Okay, so a few things just to hang on with me for those who aren't really into the building world. But I think it's really important to understand the buildings in our community. Now, this was based on information at the end of 2017. But on the far left, if you look at the pie chart underneath, so we had at the time, we worked with the assessor's office, and Paula, that was the first time I got to work with Paula, so thank you. We have a little over 205 million square feet of buildings in our community. And just over half of that, of our built environment, is single family residential. Now that's very different from the Chicagos and the Portlands of the world, because they're so dense. It's a lot more commercial buildings, whereas in Grand Rapids, we still have a lot of single family residential within our city proper. And then you can see multifamily. We worked on a definition of 5 units or more is what was included in multifamily versus other commercial buildings. And so then the chart in the middle shows the size of the building. So along the bottom, 0 to 20,000 square feet. So most of our buildings and really all of our, of course, single family residential, but even by and large, pretty much all of our multifamily residential falls in the under 20,000 square feet, which is important from a policy perspective, because a lot of cities were passing policies that would say, well, this only applies to buildings greater than 20,000 square feet. And so if we did that, it'd have a significant impact on what all was included in our policy. And then on the right-hand side, this is just showing what types of buildings do we have the most square footage of. So outside of housing, which is the most with respect to that commercial part, unrefrigerated warehouse space, office, college, K through 12, retail, et cetera. So you can get a little sense of what types of buildings we have the most of in our community. So now what happened is we took the information about what type of building it was, as well as how big the building was. And we worked with national partners who were able to gather information on the different types of energy commonly consumed by those building types to come up with estimates of energy. And so here, when you see the orange color, that is energy that's being consumed by natural gas, right? So heating, hot water. If you have a other process that you're using internally, or for a home, it could be your, your dryer, your fireplace, your gas stove, etc. And so by and large, across all the different building types, because we're a cold weather climate, 65% on average of the energy that's used by buildings is natural gas, and 35% is electricity. And if you look at the chart on the right, this starts to help us understand, regardless of the size or the type of building, which buildings are the most energy intensive, right? So we look at the total amount of energy being consumed by square foot. And so this tells a different story. While we have a lot of unrefrigerated warehouse space and education institutions, when we look at which buildings are the most energy intensive, it's predominantly within the food industry. Fast food restaurants, supermarkets, retail markets, and hospitals are also pretty high there. So from a policy perspective, if we want to focus on the buildings that are the most energy intensive, now we have some information, but we might not have a lot of them. So that's something we have to take into consideration. And then this last one is, then we took the information from energy consumed and turned it into estimated carbon emissions. And oftentimes carbon and greenhouse gas emissions are used interchangeably. So starting on the left side of this slide at the top, that's just reiterating what I've already shared, that natural gas is about 65% of what our buildings consume. But then the pie chart below that actually shows that once we convert that to greenhouse gas emissions, it's almost the exact opposite. And that's because the electricity that we use in Michigan that comes from consumers' energy is predominantly generated from burning coal, which is very dirty and unhealthy, and also generates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So while our buildings are only using about 35% electricity, that consumption accounts for nearly 65% of all of the carbon and greenhouse gas emissions that are generated. The pie chart in the middle just shows that, again, our single family residential accounts for about 38% of all of our building sector carbon emissions. And then you can see for commercial and for multifamily. And on the right, it really drills in even further into that commercial building part, that's about 50%. And when we look at our biggest buildings, so those that are over 10,000 square feet, we have, only about 1,150 of those buildings. It's less than 2% of all the buildings we have in Grand Rapids are actually that big and over 10,000 square feet. Those buildings alone account for 42%. So the vast majority of the commercial building sector's greenhouse gas emissions come from this small segment of really large buildings. Okay, so go ahead to the next one, Jen. So we also, thanks to Lou Canfield and Jono, we worked on doing some projections for what our built environment would look like if we were projecting out to 2050. So we took into consideration population growth projections for Grand Rapids. And then this graph looks at the blue are new buildings. They're expected to be constructed. Really no single family residential expected to be constructed. So that's mostly multifamily and commercial. And then the gray is existing buildings. So you can see getting out to 2050, only about a third of our buildings are actually going to be new buildings, whereas the vast majority are existing buildings. But with respect to existing buildings, a large majority of them will go through renovations or will go through sales. And those are opportunities for policy interventions. And so that's important information to have. And then when we take that square footage and we convert it again into energy, which aligns with carbon emissions, we can again see that, around 75% of all of the carbon emissions that are expected to be generated from our buildings in 2050 are going to come from existing buildings. And a lot of places I've seen people are really focused on passing policies with respect to new buildings, and hopefully code improvements will continue to help drive energy efficiency and reduce carbon in new buildings. But a significant piece of this work is how do we help existing buildings that were built with older codes achieve some pretty significant carbon reductions. So these are some of the key takeaways. I won't go through all of it, but some of the things we talked about, so on the left are the key takeaways, and then on the right are some of the recommended policy implications from Architecture 2030, right? So we know we need to focus on single family residential because it makes up such a large amount of our carbon emissions. So really talking about energy efficiency upgrades for our existing single family houses. Knowing that electricity accounts for so much of our carbon emissions. A lot of the work that my office has been doing over the last 3 years is really trying to push at the legislative and regulatory levels to force the utilities to have to move toward renewables faster to help in that specific area. We talked about, very few number of buildings that are large commercial buildings that account for 42% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So really looking at how can we be thoughtful about policies or programs that are aimed specifically at those larger buildings. And then the next two really talk about, I already mentioned, renovation rates are going to hit a significant number of our buildings, and they're pretty much all going to go through sales. So how can we use a point of renovation policy or a point of sale policy? And I think I only have maybe one more technical slide. So Jen, if you want to go ahead and go forward. So we also worked with Architecture 2030 for those who get really into the building stuff. For everyone else, want you to be aware of, we do have this sophisticated Excel model where essentially on the left, there are these different buttons that you can select, right? And so one of them for existing single family residential on the top left would be, we can select and say, okay, we have an energy efficiency policy and we can set the assumptions that it impacts X% and when it has to be implemented by. And on the middle, the three graphs will show us the total percentage of square foot in our community that would be impacted by that policy. And then it tells us how much energy could be reduced. And then the bottom graph estimates how much carbon emissions could be reduced. So I'm showing this because one of the takeaways after this would be for anybody who wants to be a little more involved or has information that could help support enhancing this particular, love to have you partner on that. So that was my quick overview of that part. And I want to introduce Jillian Gem, who's going to share about how they were helping to focus on our commercial building sector.
Thank you, Allison. So to keep it short and sweet, we're the U.S. Green Building Council of West Michigan. We exist to transform the way the buildings are designed, built, and operated. And one of our programs is the Cannabis 2030 District, which I'll explain a little bit more on the next slide. So the Cannabis 2030 District started in December 2015 with Mayor Hartwell, and it is part of 22 cities around the U.S. and Canada, which is a public-private partnership aligned with the Paris Climate Accord. So our private buildings usually are building owners, managers, and sometimes business owners, which are tenants, all looking for ways to reduce their energy and their carbon consumption. Next slide. So on this platform, we have peer-to-peer connections, education, accountability, and cutting-edge education, which help these folks find the solutions they need to reduce their carbon footprint. That would be through energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, all that's aligned with zero net carbon. As of very recently with COVID, we spent a lot of time diving deep into building occupant health and safety. And all the solutions that we provide are surrounding climate change, as well as how to create resilient and vibrant communities. Next slide. So in addition to this platform of education and information, we also help track people's data. So with the carbon and energy information that we have, we're able to say that in 2019, 157,000 metric tons of CO2 were produced in Grand Rapids by these folks who are looking to reduce their carbon footprint. Next slide.
Oh, Jillian, sorry. Can you go back and explain though how that's only a small percent of our buildings?
Yeah. So it's 16.3 thousand square feet is in the program right now, which as you saw earlier is just a small percentage of all the buildings that are in Grand Rapids overall. The majority of the buildings that we have right now are the large buildings, early adopters above 200,000 square feet. And then we have riddled a smaller amount of buildings throughout. So this is just a small portion of how much carbon is actually being produced in Grand Rapids. But with the onboarding of more and more folks into benchmarking programs and transparency, we'll be able to see that Yes, that number will grow, but we have more folks who are paying attention to their carbon and looking for ways to reduce it. So actually a recent win going off the bat was with the cannabis industry. So this public-private partnership that we have is that the cannabis industry is coming to Grand Rapids, and we want to be able to help them set up for success the right way. So the sustainability requirements in the licensing ordinance was a great way to draw their attention to benchmarking and having a sustainability plan from the start. We created the Cannabis Energy Management Best Practices Guide to help step by step them through the process of how to do the requirements of the ordinance in a way which will help them reduce their carbon footprint right now, but also a long-term plan in the future. And part of this was through benchmarking with Energy Tier Portfolio Manager that we have as our platform. So right now, what this helps us do is we work with the city to be able to approve that they are fitting their compliance goals of joining the Grand Rapids 2030 district. And we have a one-on-one connection with each of these building owners on how to reduce their carbon footprint in the future. It's been massively successful and really looking forward to seeing it grow. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Allison again.
Yeah, before I introduce Sergio, I just want to say on the cannabis part, the inclusion of energy efficiency requirements and carbon tracking in our cannabis licensing requirement was really cutting edge. We have not found very many other cities across the country that have done this and are doing this work. And a big shout out and appreciation to Kristen Turkelson and Al in the planning department, who have been key partners for us in getting that included and helping to implement it on a day-to-day basis. So we are able to use that as a little bit of a pilot for kind of energy benchmarking and transparency, which many communities are requiring commercial buildings to report on their data. And we kind of dipped our toe in the water by having that requirement for all cannabis facilities, the retail and the grow facilities. And so with that, I am going to introduce Sergio Sierra Reyes, who is with the Urban Core Collective, and as I mentioned, has been serving as our equity partner. And he's going to share about some of the work through our partnership that he and his colleagues took the lead on.
Thank you, Allison. Yes, so my title here at the Urban Core Collective is a Climate Justice Catalyst. And in that role, in that partnership as equity partner with the City of Grand Rapids, we conducted a survey with a team of folks, including some folks from the city. And these were, can we go to the next slide? These were the people that we were able to engage with. We engaged with 159 households. 120 of them completed the survey. Most of them were renters and then homeowners. So it was a good size of that. And most of the people, and 82% of them made less than 50% of the median, 50,000 in the area median income. The people that participated were mostly African American, some white, some Latinos. That is the makeup, mostly women, and a lot of people surprisingly wanted to stay involved and wanted to learn more about the work we were doing. Next slide. Some of what we found, and initially we wanted to see what people could recall from memory, and these were the two programs, and you'll see that they surfaced in other questions. When we asked from a list of 20, these were the top, 6 organizations that came to mind that people recognize. Next slide. We also found that the types of programs that people were interested in were, out of 6 options, financial assistance and energy efficiency and home rehabilitation. And in the last 10 years, these 3 programs were the ones that came to mind. So cost savings were the biggest motivators for people as they answered the survey. Next one. So the barriers, the biggest one is that people just didn't know that the programs existed. And so really to them, those programs were not there. Also, the eligibility requirements were consistently a barrier. Income requirements, outstanding bills, that kind of thing, tax requirements, and the paperwork was too long. Another thing that came to mind that was mentioned was the language barrier. Next slide. On improvements, what people said, the program providers, the utilities, the nonprofits that provide services that could help them reduced energy use in their homes. What they could improve on was more education so that people know that these services existed to them, better customer service, and then to work on the paperwork. The intake process was a big barrier. And then we asked them about the quality, whether they were satisfied, and majority of them were satisfied, but we wonder whether if they had better services available to them and they could compare whether they would choose to keep the ones that they have available to them. Next slide. We also looked at trust. We wanted to see what types of organizations we should focus on working with and what the public trusts. So to explain this graph a little bit, the bar on the red bar, as you can see, have the greatest number of lower scores, and then the purple bar, which is the nonprofits, have the largest number of like positive or scores. So the conclusion there that we reach is that people tend to trust more nonprofits than for-profit sector. I mean, I guess we didn't ask what they had in mind by this, but we can imagine maybe it's the utility companies or other providers. Next slide. We also asked about homeowners, like what, how much they are willing or have invested in the past in their home. And you can see that over not many invested beyond $10,000. Most of them invested under $5,000. And what question asked for providers is if the programs that they're providing require rebates, how much of the rebates require an upfront investment of more than $5,000? And that's something that they should consider. Next slide. Some of the services that homeowners wanted or were interested in were these, and that's pretty self-explanatory. If providers focus on these types of services, I think it might increase participation rates. Next slide. So the recommendations about the lack of awareness, we recommend that providers invest in education. They find out what these two providers, the ones that were recognized by name already, are doing already, and that they focus on programs that save people money and cost, and focus first on reduction of costs and net neutrality second, because that might be our goal, but maybe the public isn't sold on that yet. And also consider your audience, like what the income is of the people that we're targeting. Next one. The barriers, when it comes to the income qualifications, all that, we recommend that providers revisit the intake process. It's too much paperwork, takes too long to provide support in other languages. And this is one that we think would make a significant impact to create a single point of entry. Rather than having people apply to multiple services and then after spending maybe an hour, 30 minutes, finding out that they don't qualify. What about applying to a portal once and then the portal tells you all the different programs that you qualify, rather than going program to program being turned away. Next one. When it comes to trust, find out what other partners are doing, pool your resources, and look at best practices. Also be transparent about where the money, how you're using the money. And if, for example, the utility companies that tax everyone for the programs that they provide to only specific people that can take advantage of it, whether it's because it requires a rebate that requires the payment up front, then be transparent with that, and also invest in the communities from where you're extracting this dollars. The other one is match the rebates to the types of programs that people are interested in. And I believe that is it. Just wanted to share who our collaborators were. And now I also want to talk to you about the equity assessment tool that we adapted for Grand Rapids. This was an equity assessment tool that was created by Race Forward. that considered equity metrics for anybody doing work around sustainability and adaptation, and to be sensitive of how communities are disproportionately impacted. Next slide. These were the equity metrics that I'm going to be talking briefly with you about. Next slide. The first one is the energy cost burden. If you look at that line at the center, the red line, that shows the percentage of people's incomes, the household incomes that they're paying toward energy costs. Anything above 6% is not considered affordable. And if we look at the county as a whole, we look at that mostly everyone is paying above that. And the people, actually, let me clarify, people from 185 to 200% of the federal poverty line are already paying above that. But the folks that are most vulnerable at below 50% of the federal poverty line are paying 33%. That's more than what they're supposed to pay for their housing even. Next slide. Following slide is the cost energy burden and who bear, when you look at the housing stock. If in Grand Rapids, we know that so many of our homes are older than 1939. You can see the majority of them. And this is really, it's something to consider because this is directly related to how much we're going to pay in energy for electricity and gas. Next one. When we look at the next metric is income and the disparities that exist between different populations. We look here, and this is in line with the federal findings, the federal data sets. White folks make the most, while African Americans make about half of that, and other communities are somewhere in between. Next slide. When we look at gentrification and displacement, another equity metric, that was shown nationally, but a particular neighborhood of interest was the West Side, whereas the downtown spilled over the highway and construction, like where Wimcat and Bristol Market is, and that type of development. And as more housing was turned into student housing, there was a significant decrease in people of color. And we attribute this to displacement by gentrification of people of color of an entire community on the West Side. Next one. This also shows the ways in which people of color were displaced. And it just shows it breaks down the West Side by different neighborhoods and the neighbor associations that operate there. And you can see how these specific demographics have changed over time from 2010 to 2017. Next slide. When we talk about substandard housing, if we look on the right, the number of homes and see who lives in those homes, and we look at that red line at the center, we can see who lives in the most substandard housing, which population, which demographic lives in most substandard housing. Proportionately, white folks in Grand Rapids have the least amount of substandard housing, I guess per capita you can call it. And then African American, or the Black community, lives in the most substandard housing proportionately, 56%. Next slide. When we look at exposure to health risks, looking at Kent County, different zip codes, if you look at the elevated blood levels, you can see consistently what zip code, when you look at 49507, 49504, 03, and the rest of the county, you can see that 49507 disproportionately has had more children test positive for elevated blood levels. Next one. Lastly, the urban heat island effect. This is a map that shows the tree canopy in Grand Rapids, and the darker the color, the more tree canopy you can see. And if you look at the lighter colors, the yellow or beige, you can see that well, I'll tell you that Census Tract 19 is a Roosevelt Park neighborhood and the surrounding areas. So these are the communities that have the least tree cover, tree canopy, and most susceptible to the impacts of the urban heat island effects. So these are the equity metrics that we looked at, and we wanted to adapt it to Grand Rapids because we didn't want local institutions, government entities, or providers to look at the national data sets and say, that might be the case nationally, but not here in Grand Rapids. And we can see that locally, even some more starkly, there is disparities by different communities, something that we thought was very helpful and could help us leverage the finding and get providers to take action. And that's it for my part.
Thank you, Sergio. I think I have one more slide, Jen, if you go to the next one. I just also want to highlight that, oh, sorry, go back. Yeah, I've been working very intentionally with Ryan Kilpatrick in terms of the housing needs assessment. And so just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that we're having conversations with him. I'm not sure if he was able to join today, but some collaboration and opportunities. So we've talked about how with our housing fund, ensuring that projects that will receive some of this funding will be leading with low carbon opportunities and looking at how we can help support affordable housing. Sorry, lots of sirens if you're at City Hall going on around us, but looking at that in terms of, you know, how we're really helping address affordable housing by ensuring that the utility bills are as low as possible for residents who are in some of those housing. So Jen, you can go ahead and take down the slides if you wouldn't mind. For some of you, if you might not be aware, you know, I have learned a lot from residents that have participated in different webinars and work sessions that we've done, particularly for renters, talking about spending upwards of $450 a month on their natural gas DTE bills in the wintertime. And that's because a lot of that housing that Sergio shared is so old that it was not, you know, regulated by state energy and building codes that required insulation, for instance. And so just a lot of disparities layered on top of each other with respect to that, and how, you know, we can really be helping to address health, affordability, comfort, and safety for our residents, you know, while also being able to bring down the carbon emissions. So I want to pause now for a minute and go ahead and open it up and see if anybody has any information. That was kind of our high level overview of our Zero Cities project and what we did over 3 years, and see if anybody has any comments or questions with respect to that before the second part we transition into the next phase of that work. And I should also say, because I saw him because he turned his camera on, but Jono and Lou and Aaron Banchoff in community development were some key partners all along throughout the Zero Cities project, and really helped me as I first came onto the city to get my bearing in this work and see what the opportunities were there. So appreciation to those folks as well. Yeah, Jono.
Thanks, Allison. I've seen some of this before. It is, I'll echo Sierra's comment. It's impressive the amount of information you have and the evaluations that you've done. I think my question is for Sergio, actually. Using the survey, I think all the data from the survey that you presented. I'm curious, and I apologize if I missed it, but I would suspect that the motivations for homeowners versus landlords are very different to participate in programs like this. And I'm wondering if you have any sort of insight into that, because that then would translate into, you know, implementation of various programs.
We didn't ask any about the motivation. So anything I'm about to say is just, you know, I'm guessing that I think motivation, and to be honest, we did think about that, but there wasn't a way to kind of capture that in a survey that wouldn't make it as long, because we were trying to keep it short. I think that's why we kind of incorporated the health part into the project, so that we could not only make it about energy reduction, but also health. The energy reduction might increase the value of the home, improve the quality of the home, but also the health effects would be motivators. And also one idea that we had in mind is for a possible policy would be about like disclosing how much people have to pay in their utility bills when they're looking at a home. And as somebody that's renting a home might be interested in finding out that if it's like $300 or $400 a month, maybe that's not the best apartment that they want to rent. So we're thinking some of those motivators. I don't know that answers your question, but it's just kind of like guessing what might be motivating people to take advantage of the programs.
Sean, I would just add, thank you, Sergio, that when I've talked to peers across the country, for those of you who perhaps are newer to this, right, the split incentive. So when it comes to landlords and renters in this space, right, you know, if the renters are paying for the utility bills, what incentive does the landlord have to implement energy efficiency, right? Because it's really not going to help them. Ultimately, it's just going to reduce. So why would they invest capital dollars into putting in a new furnace, for instance, maybe in their apartment complex or something? And so it's been a very difficult area. And when I work with peers in other cities across the country, I have not really seen any cities that have successfully addressed the split incentive in terms of from a policy perspective. And so it's something that, you know, we're working alongside our peers, and maybe we can identify something in partnership with staff in our community that we could try as an innovative approach in this area. I do know I've started to hear a little bit, because some of the concerns too are, you know, even if there are investments made and the landlord wants to recoup costs, right, it's ultimately going to trickle down to increased rent, which then impacts the renter, and some concerns around that as well. And so I've started to see some looking at trying to do a community benefits type agreement to hold steady a rental rate for a certain period of time. And so that's a little bit newer, trying to look into that and see if that might be an opportunity for us to pursue here. And you'll hear a little bit in our E.H.Zero, but Sergio has brought on some colleagues, one in particular who actually owns some homes in Grand Rapids and is a renter. So we're hoping to be able to lean into some of those folks' expertise, right? Which is very different than somebody who owns a multifamily complex that's renting it out. Anybody else have any questions or observations? I hope that this data, we try to make it available. The links on the slide deck that you got should be live, and we have a resources page at the end. So we have links to take you directly to all of this information. If anybody wants more details on any of the particular reports, you know, happy to provide that or walk through it with you, because it is some really amazing data to be aware of. It's very difficult, and I often have to check my white privilege when I review the data, because it can be very traumatic for our residents of color to see just kind of layered one on top of another, the obstacles that they're facing in the community. And so, but happy to share more of that with any of you if that's something of interest. And please let us know if you find this data valuable to any of the work that you're doing, because we'd love to have it support some of your work as well. I'm not seeing any other hands come up. So why don't we go ahead, just a quick 5-minute break in case you need to get some water, or you just want to stand up for a minute, and we'll plan to come back right at 2 o'clock and launch into the second half of the presentation, where we'll go into more detail on what the next phase of this work looks like, building upon the Zero Cities work. So thanks. We'll see you in about 5. All right. For those of you, if you're back and you wouldn't mind for a moment just turning on your camera so we know everybody who's back. Maybe just give it another minute to make sure everybody was able to take a quick break. Plus, I like to see all of you. It's so great. All right, let's give it about. I know some people might be joining us for the second round who had already had the opportunity to dive into the Zero City stuff earlier in the year. So we might have some new folks that will join us. All right, well, there might be some other folks that are going to join us, but I'm going to take this opportunity now. For those of you that haven't had the opportunity yet to meet Jen Spiller, she is been with us for just a little over a month now, and she is our new Healthy and Sustainable Buildings Policy Specialist. Super excited to have her here at the city. She spent about 10 years with Healthy Homes Coalition and has a lot of vast experience in terms of working with residents in our community, particularly those, as Sergio was mentioning, struggling with family members that have elevated blood lead levels, and really helping to navigate a lot of the different programs and variety of programs and some of the obstacles that Sergio even mentioned that we learned from our NOF survey. And she's also finishing up getting her Master's of Public Health from Hopkins, and has a wealth of knowledge in terms of health impacts from environmental pollutants and environmental exposure. So super excited to have her here at the City of Grand Rapids. You'll see in some of the slides that she's going to share, we were able to bring her on to the city as a part of the fundraising efforts that the three partners that I mentioned were able to successfully do. And so she is really here to lead this work and can serve as your main point of contact. And after she goes through, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise at the end where there's a shared Excel document that I'd like everybody to take some time to fill out. But I'd also offer that if that's not your preferred avenue of providing some feedback and letting us know what is most helpful to you, please reach out to Jen. You know, we can set up some meetings, one-on-ones, a 30-minute check-in with you to dive more deeply or answer questions specifically about how this work might be integrated with some of the work that you're going to be doing over the next couple of years and support you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jen, and she's going to help provide an overview of this new E.H.Zero initiative.
Thank you, Allison. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. All right. Hi, so I'm going to be introducing the Grand Rapids Policies and Programs for Equitable, Healthy, and Zero Carbon Buildings Initiative, which is what we call it E.H.Zero for short. And so after all of the valuable work that came out of the Zero Cities project, the team members involved decided to continue the relationship and launch this new initiative. So the desired outcome for E.H.Zero is that residential and commercial building policies and programs will be co-created and supported by the community, focused on equitably achieving increased affordability, beneficial health outcomes, and resilience while reducing energy consumption and carbon emissions. The key objectives of this initiative are to lead with equity in the development of policies and programs that will reduce carbon emissions from buildings and homes, to educate all interested stakeholders on the Zero Cities project outcomes and possible policy options, to engage all interested stakeholders in the co-creation of these policies and programs, to enhance and expand building policy modeling dashboard. It's a dashboard that we created to project impacts, to support data-driven decisions, to complete a housing renovation pilot on at least 5 homes, which I'll speak to in a moment, to present to the City Commission in about 2 years a package of policies that will achieve equitable decarbonization within buildings, and to create a plan for and begin implementing these policies and programs, including a whole homes navigator style program, and to incorporate building sector specific goals and key strategies into the climate action and adaptation plan. So this is a summary of the E.H.Zero task by leading organization. I won't read through each one, but just to summarize, so the City of Grand Rapids will be taking, in the Office of Sustainability and Performance Management, we'll be taking the initiative on general climate change, education and promotion, addressing environmental justice topics, and we're going to launch that webinar series in the spring. We're also doing policy and program research, which is a big part of my role here. Developing an equity-focused menu of policies, completing a building carbon emissions inventory and vulnerability assessment, and assisting with engagement and sharing the knowledge along the way. The Urban Core Collective has been instrumental in the Zero Cities process, education, and just promotion of this work in general. They'll be coordinating a BIPOC equity consulting team that will help inform our work in this initiative, and in general, they will be just serving as our equity partner in this role. And the U.S. Green Building Council of West Michigan, they really are expert on the commercial building sector, and so they were also very instrumental in the original Zero Cities process education. They'll be developing marketing and educational materials, working with the commercial sector on education, hosting workshops, tracking data, and exploring compliance and enforcement. So this is a summary of our budget so far. For this project, it was estimated that we need about 1.3 million for 3 years. And so that helps pay for my time here, as well as for our partner engagement with Urban Core Collective and the Grand Rapids 2030 District. And we also have money set aside to compensate the BIPOC equity consultation team members. And then we have a significant portion set aside for our housing renovation pilot of 5 homes and for a residential housing partner to help lead that project. And so this, so far we've secured almost $1 million from the Wege Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, and Summit Foundation. These are the members of our BIPOC consultation team. We had our first meeting with them today, and we're just really grateful for them being interested in this work. But they represent different organizations in the community, but they're also here as individuals. So not necessarily speaking for their organizations, but we wanted to show the diversity of where they're coming from. So what's next with E.H.Zero? So we've launched the BIPOC equity consultation team. We've hired me at the city, and we plan to continue fundraising to confirm our housing partner, ideally by February, to offer an educational webinar series in the spring, to complete a community-wide carbon emissions inventory by the summer, to authentically engage stakeholders in co-creation of policies and programs. So that will happen over the course of 12 months, starting in the spring, to conduct the housing renovation pilot, hopefully starting in the summer of 2022, to work in partnership to include the learnings and outcomes in housing fund development and community master plan initiatives, and to present a package of building policies that will improve affordability and health outcomes while reducing carbon emissions for the City Commission's consideration in about 2 years from now. So educational opportunities for E.H.Zero. So as I mentioned, we're planning to launch an educational webinar series in the spring. So that will, we're looking for that to go, starting in early 2022 and to continue for about 6 months. So at the City of Grand Rapids, we'll be focusing on developing education and webinars for the community around general sustainability topics, environmental justice, and climate change. And the U.S. Green Building Council, they've already started drafting a lot of great content around educating the community on the potential policy options, such as energy benchmarking and transparency, point of sale energy disclosure, building performance standards, zero code, renewable electricity for large commercial buildings, as well as some contextual webinars on carbon and buildings. Another next step that we're going to take is selecting a local housing partner. So this housing partner will manage the renovation of, or the housing renovation pilot program. So we're aiming to have 5 houses go through this program, ideally from the neighborhoods of focus. And we have about 30,000 per house, and we plan to do like wraparound energy services and repairs while also leveraging existing programs in the community, such as utility rebates, weatherization, home repair services. And for this partner, we've set aside 60 grand for them to manage this project and connect the homes with the contractors. So ideally with this partner, we want a partner organization that will be very equity centered and can assist us with measuring the health, financial, and energy and carbon outcomes from this project, because we'd like to apply these learnings from this pilot to potentially expanding into a whole homes navigator program or some other program. But hopefully this will help us learn what works best for people and what co-benefits we can get when we combine affordability, health, and sustainability. And so policy options that we're exploring. So this is just, these are just some examples of policy options that we're looking at. We're looking at what other cities are doing, and I've already started making connections with folks across the US, but none of this is set in stone. So for single family residential, we're looking at potentially doing energy audits and lead sampling for residential certification or rental certification. Potentially requiring disclosure of 12 months of utility data or an energy label at point of sale or lease, certification for environmentally friendly design and construction training for contractors and designers, comprehensive all electric ready new construction requirements, and the whole homes program that I mentioned, where it would be sort of a concierge service for repairs, safety, health, energy, and financing. And then on the commercial side, we're looking at building performance standards, potentially based on carbon reduction as opposed to energy. So there's some freedom with how the owner chooses to approach reducing their carbon. And then looking for building owners to complete and disclose their energy efficiency data, mandating benchmarking to help track their reduction of energy use, adopting stricter building codes if allowed by the state, and incentives towards or incentivizing renewable electricity for large commercial buildings. And so overall, we want to engage with all stakeholders who are interested in the built environment. And historically, those folks included construction companies, building owners, real estate companies, but we also want to get ahead of projects and really engage people who are investing in new building developments or renovations. We want to connect with the city departments like economic development, community development, and the planning department, as well as project developers. And we definitely especially want to focus on people and engaging tenants and residents, our neighbors, and community-based organizations and neighborhood associations. And with this, we're taking a holistic approach. So starting with local building policies, but outside of that, looking into voluntary programs and getting engaged with the community master planning process and zoning ordinances, economic development incentives, financing options, and another part of my role too is staying engaged with what's going on at the federal and state level around legislation and regulations on energy codes and building codes, because that has a big impact on where our limitations are as a city, as well as what opportunities there are for us. So other key next steps for the city. So we plan to complete a community-wide carbon emissions inventory by July 2022 and a vulnerability assessment. We plan to host stakeholder conversations about if the city should pass the community-wide carbon emissions goal, and if yes, what that goal should be. To complete a revised regional hazard mitigation plan, a climate action and adaptation plan, and a comprehensive community master plan. And to continue to reduce municipal carbon reductions, such as with electric vehicles and fleet, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. So now pause for reflections and questions.
Thanks, Jen. If you wouldn't mind, you can go ahead and take your slides down. And there was one thing I realized that we didn't have a slide on, and that probably would have been important to lead with. So when we talk about the Whole Homes Navigator program, just to share a little bit with you, Jen, do you mind? Can you take the slides down? Thanks. About what that could mean, and maybe some of you might be thinking like, why am I here? And what does this have to do with my work? So one of the things that we've noticed, and Sergio touched on it a little bit, was, residents really feeling like there are so many different programs that they're being asked to participate in, right? And so maybe DTE comes and knocks their door and says, what about this program? Or consumers, or the cities were asking them or interacting with them about code compliance, or community development, or get the let out program, or they're engaged with Healthy Homes Coalition, or even trying to determine financing or eviction prevention. There are a lot of different organizations ultimately with the desire to engage our households on a variety of different options. And so this idea of a Whole Homes Navigator program is, how can we get together and understand all of these different projects, right? Maybe it's the rain gardens that have been done. I know Carrie's helped with that. Maybe it's planting more trees on private property, right? And pulling in the forestry department and our collaboration with Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, helping on water conservation, just ensuring that the household is aware of how to participate in our single stream recycling programs. But essentially to say, let's not just have, each individual person try to enter the home and engage the resident on just energy efficiency, right? Or just water conservation, or just trees, or even thinking about the fire department's really great residential safety assessment program, right? Like, how can we help roll that in to understand that anytime an energy audit's being done, right, we're keying in and saying, hey, do you know that this program is available to you as well? How can we streamline that process for our residents so they're not having to figure out how to engage in almost 10 to 15 different programs that are offered or required in our community. And so that's kind of this idea behind the Whole Homes Navigator, where maybe we could put together, and the fire department's already started it, right? But like a booklet of all the major different touch points that we want a household to know from a climate change perspective, a climate resilience perspective, that will include a lot of this. And then as different agencies, the city, whomever engages a household, right, we could almost say, here's a list of different programs and projects. What's most important to you? If what's most important to you is that your child has asthma, let's get you connected with Healthy Homes Coalition and look at that, right? If what's most important to you is lead, let's get you connected with Get the Lead Out, Healthy Homes Coalition, but then let's also think about how can we leverage perhaps some rebates to replace the windows in your home through consumers or through DTE to also help address the lead issue in your home, right? And so trying to streamline and better bring a lot of these different programs and touch points, not only with the city, but some of our key partners together. So before we kind of jump into the exercise, does anybody have any questions or thoughts or concerns or something that they'd like to share on the E.H.Zero program?
Allison, I can't find my hand to raise, so, but I do have a question. It's Kristen from the Planning Department. I have a question about, I think it's page 73 of the slide deck and a few precursors to that. You talk about local building policies, and I'm just curious if you could elaborate on what you mean by that. Are you looking for state code changes that then would be reflected in how we administer the state building code? Or are you talking about incentive programs that would incentivize a homeowner to go beyond the minimum building code?
Both. So yes, so I am working, and I have worked with Bill in your department and others on the state codes. So that's one area, right? Like, I know that's an area where we've been collaborating. So I flagged that on the Excel document because Michigan's getting ready to adopt, right, the next building and energy code. So how are we working together on that? And then understanding how that impacts us locally, right? But I'm not the expert in that area. So I need for you and your team to help me understand what that means and how we can make sure that that's, we're aware of it and helping to support how we can. but it also will mean looking at other opportunities that we have. And so kind of on the slide, it was back on 71, which we call it, policy options that we're just exploring. And we've done a lot of research on what other cities have done, but I don't want to predetermine. We want to co-create with community and with staff. So I don't want anybody to go into this thinking that it's already been settled. But a few things that have been done in some other areas, and I'll just stick to residential right now, might require any contractors have to have education on environmentally friendly and healthy building design, right? Like before you can build in the community or get a permit, you as the contractor or the person applying for the permit have to show that you've received this sort of kind of education or continuing education in that area. Others would be in the residential rental certification program. Some other communities, Doug Matthews has shared his familiarity with this, where you could require an energy audit be completed as a part of obtaining your residential certification program. Some other things which we have to look at and understand what we can do with respect to the building and energy codes and not running afoul of that. But, some places are looking at requiring that buildings are all electric ready, right? Doesn't mean you have to be all electric. It just means if you're intending to put in a gas stove, that you also put in an electrical outlet next to it, so that if at whatever point in time somebody wants to be all electric, the infrastructure is there and in place. So, but I have been working with Jono and Jeremiah, kind of more on the economic development side, and how we can build some of these in to see from an economic development incentive perspective, how likely people are to lean into that area via an incentive mechanism as well. So does that help, Kristen?
It does. Thank you. I would just put a plug in, like, as part of that work, I think we really need to make sure we understand what are the financial implications of if the code does change, and we're advocating for those code changes for the greater good of the work that you're talking about. We really need to understand what is that financial impact, about how much does that increase construction cost or saleability or whatever it is, because I think that also speaks to the affordable housing crisis that you spoke to right at the beginning of your presentation. So I just don't think we can solely focus. I don't think we have the luxury of solely focusing on the fact that these policy changes would improve environmental outcomes without at least understanding the implications of that.
Absolutely. And that's why in the beginning, we really talked a lot about affordability, right? And that piece, and wanting to be aware of those, and wanting to bring, that's a big part of like this next part, just knowing like who can be the main point of contact that we can work with when that comes up, right? So that we're addressing it holistically, right? With our sustainability value that we have, to Kristen's point, it's equally about financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, right? And human sustainability. And quite frankly, I'll say in honesty, a big part that I'll share too is that I learned in the work that I was doing with Sergio is, sitting in my white privilege in City Hall and going out, and professionals who are in my position would say, well, you know what, climate change is a problem and it's mostly affecting people of color. And guess what? You should care about X, Y, and Z and do this in your home. And then wondering why the programs were not being well received, right? And so understanding that, particularly with our residents who have just enormous obstacles and concerns in their day-to-day life, affordability probably being the number one, right? And health issues being very close to that as well. Not wanting to approach and engage people and saying, don't you care about reducing carbon emissions from your home? Because the answer is no, I don't, right? I mean, the large majority of people, the answer is no, I don't. And so wanting to be able to understand how we can really address the affordability and how we can address health outcomes by leveraging some energy efficiency, weatherization programs, utility rebates, et cetera, to ultimately achieve affordability and health, and as a co-benefit, really having carbon. So the short answer is absolutely, we do have to think about that and look into it.
Thank you. And my last plug would be, if we're going to require any sort of local certification, we need to make sure that the departments that are going to be implementing that have adequate capacity and resources to be able to manage the additional certification process.
Yes, that's another great point. And also the reason to engage in this, to know who's going to do some of this work, because a big part, right, this grant funded program is to identify, what's the realm of possibility, right? But then we have to understand, as we know, our city manager is very adamant, like, don't come with a policy recommendation unless you have an implementation plan, right? So I'm not going to come with something and just say, well, I don't know who's going to do it or how it's going to get paid for. It was actually a big learning lesson from some of my cities. It was Atlanta. Their mayor's office passed an energy benchmarking and transparency policy. All buildings have to do this. Well, they never worked with their buildings team. They didn't work with anybody else. And so the policy went into effect and there was no one to implement it, right? And it truly just kind of became a disaster and nothing ever got done. And so I do very much want to think about that as a part of anything that we look at. So kind of going back to what you did, and I'm going to bring up the Excel document. I don't see any other hands, but people put them up if you have a question or comment. So right now, right, we wanted to bring on our city partners early in the process. So you could help us know almost like at what point is it like, okay, you need to bring me in, right? And you might say, keep me fully engaged because I have so many touch points. Okay, we don't want to over engage you if it's not worth your time, but we want to make sure that we're aware of, like Kristen said, of these items so that they're key items that you know from your operations that we're considering as we start to think about this. Because we're really planning, Jen kind of shared the timeline, but really probably through March or April, we're just trying to do education. Essentially what we shared with you today, we're trying to get out to all of our different stakeholders and share all of this information and make it available. So if you have groups that you think would be really important for us to share this with, right? And I've talked to Jeremiah, like we want to, how do we share this with like the developer community or through the development center, which I've done some of the webinars in the past, right? And the lunch and learns with the development center. So if you have opportunities like that, where we can help push this information out to some of your network, that would be extremely helpful. And we would like to know about that. And once we're done with that education, right, it'll kind of waffle a little bit, but we're going to do that 12 months of co-creation. And essentially the idea is we'll do some work with staff first, like Kristen, what you just said. I don't want to go out and even kind of stir up interest in a required educational program if we don't know what that's going to look like, right? So how can we have some conversations and know what some of those key concerns are from a city staff perspective before we go into the engagement with community? Because then we really want to have open dialogue and say, these are some options we've learned about from other cities. Maybe you have something wholly new and innovative that could work in our community. Here are some of the concerns, but let's talk about it and ultimately work to try to figure out, what are 2, 3, 4 that our community might be with and willing to support. All right, well, not seeing any other hands, I am actually going to share my screen now. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, well, here, Jen, I'll bring it up myself. I had a couple extra slides and I'll go ahead and drive here. I just wanted to share with all of you the kind of the directions so you can, go back to this slide deck if you're looking to refer to it as you're looking through this. The idea and the ask, I know everybody's busy right now, so if it's not possible, just let us know what does work for you. But if you're able to just kind of fill out and input some of your information at a minimum, just so we kind of understand where you would like to plug in by the end of this week. I really hope it shouldn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes. And I intentionally built this time in now into this meeting so that you could do it now. So maybe you'll get it done now and not have any other time that you need. But so this is kind of just a few slides on what the goal is with respect to, I don't know how to move this. Oh, okay. Okay, so this is a live link here. I also sent it to you in your email address and I'll go to the form in a minute, but just a few things in general. Everybody should have full edit access. For those of you who are outside the city, I'm working to try to figure that out, but I did send you just an Excel document and please work with Jen. It's a shared document, so multiple people can be in it at one time, right? So I can already see who's in it. Allison Froley's in it. I think it's Henry's in it and a couple of other people are already in the document. It does autosave itself, so you don't have to do a save. Please do not do a save as and save it anywhere else. Otherwise your saves won't be saved, right? Your changes won't be saved. You have to maintain them within this shared document. If it does something a little funny, just try closing out of it and reopening it. So I mentioned the requested deadline this Friday if possible, and I'm going to give the time here for anybody who has questions or for you to go in and kind of see what we're looking for. I would recommend when you click the link, oftentimes it'll bring it up in a website. And there's an option right in the middle top, if you're not accustomed to shared documents, that says open in the desktop application. It'll open it in kind of your normal Excel. I find that functionality much easier to navigate. I'll show you there are some filters on the top row, so you can start to filter and understand, what might be specifically relevant to you or your department. And then just something I've learned, if you have it open and you're not going to work on it for a while, please just go ahead and close it. Like, don't try not to accidentally leave it open overnight. That's when sometimes we get some finicky things with a shared document, but it does save old versions. So I can always go back to an old version if you feel like you put something in that's not adequately reflected in the document. So these are the key items I'm going to go over, but there are some actions that I've put in here, which are key actions that, my office in partnership with the partners that we're going to be taking for this. So you can add ones that you think are missing. Some of the examples that I'll walk through, key partners to engage. If you really have some specific partners you think we should engage in this, you can fill it out there. Developing the whole homes program, if that's something you feel like your department should be involved in. I'm just asking for a department and a contact person so we know with whom to communicate. And then we have 2 columns that say collaboration requests 1 and 2. It's just if you want to put 2. And the options really are, I am asking that you try to select from one of these, right? Like, just keep me informed. I always want to be on your email list so I know what's happening. That's it. Like, not going to do anything else on this topic, but I'd like to at least know what's happening. Maybe it's, I have something that your team and your partners should be aware of. So, right, I think one of them will show in there, but it's just, master plan community engagement, right? I mean, like, that's obviously something big that's going on. So do we have an opportunity to partner with you on any of that? Right. Then there's one, it's like, we will lead, your department is the lead on that work, and you want to identify that you're the lead on that work and put a note for, how you think this could plug in or what you think we could do to help support the work that you're doing. You can support our office in this particular work, or you can co-lead. And then I just put other in case you have something else. And there's an important for the office to know and other comments. So let me just let me real quick see if I put this in here. Are you guys seeing the Excel document? No. Okay, I got to redo my screen sharing. Thank you, Kristen, for nodding. All these different platforms. How do I? There we go. Okay. All right. So feel free to go into the Excel document if you want to go into the Excel document. And I'll also just show a few things here that I'll navigate on screen for you. So can I get a thumbs up? Are you seeing the Excel doc? Perfect. Okay, right. So here are a couple things. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of examples because you'll see my team has tried to put some things in here. Edit it if it's not right, right? We just tried to use it as some examples to support, right? So like co-creation sessions, right? We mentioned as a part, we wanted to do 12 months of like engagement where people are going to come in and help us talk about the policies. So I put planning in Layla, and you might be like, no, that's not right. And I put, planning is leading, is there any way to partner with any of your master plan engagement, to work with that? And if you don't think that's right or a good use, you can delete it. It's really just an example right now. Another one, so key partners to engage, right? Stacy, I put OEE and working with Jordan, something you should be aware of. We have our monthly neighborhood association meetings, right? So do we have an opportunity to plug in there and share information? And how often do people want to be updated? Some of the other types of things I put in here, like partner on the housing renovation pilot, right? I put community development in terms of supporting the office by just ensuring we are aware of our housing rehab program and our Get the Let Out program. So can we leverage those programs as a part of our housing pilot? A couple others, development center, I put in here maybe support with needed building renovation resources and permits, right? Like, what do we need to be aware of? So we are complying with your process and working in the best way possible we need, knowing that we have 5 homes that we want to do some pretty significant renovation to, so that, and some of our partners, they might already know it, right? Because we're going to get a housing partner and presumably they're experienced in this area, but I am not experienced in that area and I don't want to miss something. So programs to be created, right? I put economic development, and they're leading this, right? The economic development project evaluation matrix. And I'm already working with them in terms of to make sure sustainability information is being incorporated for purposes of, thinking through how we evaluate for economic development incentives. So you can go through here, you can see, that detailed Excel file. I put both housing next, and Paula, I put assessor if you're still on, because I suspect we probably are going to want updated assessor information on buildings, right? To the extent that we're going to do more of that. And it looks like you've already added some information, so much appreciation there. And the whole homes model, there's a host of things I put here already, right? Like our residential RSA program, the housing program, water conservation opportunities, right? Bill pay assistance, planting trees on private property. So those are just some of the things that we've started to put in here. So let's say you come in here and you realize, okay, there's something that myself or my department should be engaged around the building policy model. Just come in, just insert a new row, right? Just cut and copy this and then fill in your name, your department, and whatever it is you think should be here. This is just kind of a, what do you think we should be aware of and we should know? How do you want to partner? How do we fit in? And then if you just have other general comments that you want to make sure that's on our radar right now. You may not have a collaboration request number 2. This might have just been superfluous, but if you have more than one thing that you want to say, like, we're going to take the lead, but also, I don't know, keep me informed, right? You might have 2 different ones that you might want to
Allison,
put.
can I ask you a question?
Yep.
These action items, I apologize, and maybe I need some assistance offline here, but I'm looking at the expand building policy model. And then the state legislative action, like what action? I don't know how to say whether I would lead it or not if I don't understand like more detail about what the action item is. Does that make sense?
It does. So our attempt today, but I'm hearing you say you need more. So we're gonna have to think through that. And if others feel that way, let me know so we can plan something accordingly.
Could just be me.
But no, other people need to let me know because this is going to be important, right? So the building policy model that I just showed the one Excel slide, right? Without getting into all the details, but essentially it was like, if you really want to be involved in, if we select this policy, it'll impact this many square feet, energy, carbon, like the development of that model. I would want you to indicate here. So we know when we do work on that model that you're engaged. And maybe I just need to put better descriptions here to tie it back to the presentation. But maybe, maybe we could put slide numbers here just to really be very clear about what we're talking about. Or maybe I just
kind of from other colleagues here, but I think that would be helpful because I'm just looking at.
It would be, Kristen. I'm kind of in the same position. I didn't realize that these tie back to the slides. So maybe it's just a matter of looking at these side by side when we open them up, I suppose. But then it's not clear to me, are we to be adding actions, or are those that are in here are those that we should just be plugging ourselves into?
Both. So I'll do this and we'll work on putting more details here and referencing the slide deck specifically. But David, to your point, you can work from the ones that are here, but if there's something you're aware of that you think should be on here and is not, you have the ability to add something. Right? I'm not saying that there should be something that, David, you should already know about, right? And should be in your mind and that you should know. I've tried to create the ones that I'm aware of. So I think most likely most of them are here, but I could just not be thinking of something that should be here. And so we'll put more details here because, Kristen, I was trying to find the other one that you were mentioning, like, state legislative actions, right? So here I would put, building and energy code revisions, right here, right? And this might be like MPSC, consumers energy, IRP, right? So like those who are aware of that, you'll already know whether you're participating in that or not participating in that, right? But at least it's providing a little bit more detail in that area. But you might be aware of, and I don't think Connie and her team's on, but like federal government actions. If you know that they're talking about funding that can touch houses or can touch buildings where we could leverage to try to have it achieve some of these things, I'd like for you to put it in here because I might not know about it, right? And so David, the big one from your perspective is, really more around the forestry part, right, that I put in here, but there might be other things from Parks and Recreation perspective that you're thinking about specific to these houses and these households that we want to be pulling from or thinking about or including. And you may just say, okay, you want to work on trees? Okay, like we have a couple partners here. Let's try to leverage how in those particular homes, we could put more trees on private property because we know it'll help our tree canopy. We know it provides insulation for the home. We know it helps clean the air. We know it helps bring down urban heat island effect, and that's going to help the residents' health, right, and their finances. It's also going to help grow our tree canopy. But I'll make sure we fill this out and we put more specific information in here and link back and provide more details.
That'd be great.
In general, outside of needing more details there, is this making sense to people?
I think so. I guess I'm still a little reluctant to say that I'm going to sign up for something if I don't know what like the policy direction is. You know, we've had in the past, Allison, where you and I weren't necessarily aligned on how we wanted to move forward. And so I want to be a partner and work with you, but I don't know if I can lead something if it's not something our department can support. You know what I mean? Maybe that just is something that gets fleshed out through the process.
Well, I'm hoping so, because what I'm hoping to do here is identify who will be engaged in those conversations.
Okay.
For us to partner on them before we get to any decision making, right?
Okay.
Or any recommendation of doing this. I want to start ahead of that, so I'm already aware of what your concerns are.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to avoid getting to the place where my team worked in our own little bubble and we went out and we're like, oh, okay, this seems great and the community really loves it. And I come back and I've got two departments. They're like, that is never going to work because of X, Y, and Z, right? Or, you know, even if we're going to disagree and say from this perspective, I don't support this perspective, but we can at least present that, right? But I want to be ahead of that. So we know that before we start going out to engage people. Because no sense in any of it, you know, like I don't need to spend time engaging people on something if it's just like that will never work here. I always get a little nervous with silence because I feel like it's either people are like, oh yeah, I got this, no big deal, or I have no idea what she wants me to do and I'm really confused. So I still can't figure, oh, here we go, I stop sharing. So here's what I'll say as the big takeaways. We're going to update this. We'll make it available until the end of the month, right? Like, don't worry about this Friday so that people feel like they have more time. I know the holidays, but it's fresh in your mind now. Anybody who wants to have, even after we update this, which we'll commit to getting done today or tomorrow, by the end of the day, anybody who still feels like you need more information to understand something, reach out to Jen and we will coordinate a time to be able to set aside, you know, like 35 minutes or 30 minutes to meet specifically with you or your department, answer any specific questions you have, you know, or just brainstorm a little bit more to clarify this if there's some specific things, right? Some of you have a little bit more of a limited role, perhaps, you know, like David in some of that work, but I could just be missing something completely from your perspective, right? That I'm not thinking about. And Kristen's role is really much more extensive in terms of how we'll be partnering with her and a number of the different departments in her area, right? Like Sierra, just trying to think through some of your work and the interesting things that you're doing, right? And around equity and around the river and around different things. And you might ultimately say, you know, other than coming to share your information with my group one time so they can be aware of it, if I think it's of interest to them, and here's how you can do that, you might say, that's it. That's all I got. That's all, you know, that's going to be my only role or my only part in this. And that's okay. So yeah. I think some of the other things, I'm trying to look at the people on here, you know, Tim, I think from an engineering perspective, part of it will also be the selection of the 5 homes, right? I want to be thoughtful about, we can't address everything, but does somebody have code compliance issues? Does somebody have back taxes issues? Is there a street project going on around somewhere at the same time, you know, where this is all happening, to be aware of or to understand, you know, and be mindful of those types of things.
I don't see anyone from community development. Perhaps I'm just missing it quickly on the list.
Well, they were invited. It just unfortunately, it looks like none of their team was able to attend. So I'm
Yeah.
going to follow up specifically
Okay.
with Connie and her team. Thank you, Kristen.
That's
Connie,
what I was just
Aaron,
gonna
and
suggest.
Tammy were invited.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't trying to call them out for not being here, just more of a,
Yeah.
hey, if they're not here, they seem to play a pretty significant role in some of the recommendations that you had listed. So I think having a sidebar with them would be critical.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Well, I want all your time is very valuable. I will stick on for the next 15 minutes as well as my team in case anybody has questions that you want to ask me now. I would appreciate it for anybody that does have a concern or doesn't feel like this template is, it's not jiving well with you or how you feel you can share information with us. Please let us know, today or tomorrow, because we want to be responsive and recognizing there's a holiday and getting something set up with your team over the next few weeks, just to make sure that we can provide clarity and answer any questions you might have. So if you would like that, then, please let Jen know this week in the next couple days if you're able to. Okay. Yeah, Stacy, I don't know. Your team and your roles might be limited because I know you're doing a lot on engagement now, right? I'm trying to avoid duplication, right? So if you know of something, and we've already talked about like neighborhood summit, right? Maybe you just put that on here and that's one of the key areas to do, engagement. And you just say, hey, neighborhood summit, here are the dates when it's going to be.
Yep, everyone say the date, May 21st. It's tentative, but May 21st summit.
And there might, you guys are doing a lot of amazing work. I can't, but I don't even know. Could we leverage neighborhood match fund? But this is specific for a household, so I don't know, but anything like that comes to mind, just so we have it on our radar and we can at least go back and check in with you again to say, hey, does this really work knowing X, Y, and Z? And you might say, no, unfortunately it doesn't. Okay, but at least we didn't miss it.
Gotcha.
All right. Carrie, I see your hand.
Yeah, just curious when we're looking at outside partners, like I look at this and a lot of the stuff is stuff WEMAC does too, is that, at the very least, they should be kept in the loop, but I don't know. That doesn't seem to be part of the spreadsheet.
So this one right now is very focused on our own departments, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of community partners that we want to engage. So for instance, we've done one webinar with a list of housing partners, right? For people who might be interested in serving as the housing partner. We're going to do one with like the utilities and the MPSC. We're going to do one with environmental groups. So WEMAC will be included in that so that we do, right? I don't want to create programs where they already exist. I just want people to be able to effectively use the programs that exist. So by all means, we'll probably have something separate. But even because you work so closely with them, Carrie, like if you can throw it on this sheet, like, hey, don't forget, rainy day fund or, rain barrel workshops or whatever to put in here so that it's on the radar.
Okay.
Yeah, and if others have partners too, it could be key partners to engage that you put it on there just to make sure we're not missing it. All right, team, thank you. I'll hang on, but for those of you that feel comfortable, unless you want to ask questions, enjoy the rest of the sunny day and we'll be in touch. Appreciate your time.
Okay, sorry, Allison, I have more questions.
That's okay, go for it. I figured we'd schedule a meeting, but happy to help, and maybe some of our team members have answers for you too.
Oh yeah, we can schedule a follow-up. I wondered, it wasn't a question about your presentation as much as whether there's any merit in also making sure that we're talking about what other initiatives relative to the lands that we're requiring as part of our sustainability efforts. Like, I'm just listening to you talk about the tree canopy and planting trees on private property. And of course, my head goes to, well, we made a very strategic decision when we developed the tree canopy ordinance that we don't have any protection measures for single and two family homes, that people can clear cut their single and two family properties at will. And so there's no like protection measures in place currently if we incentivize or have a program for the planting of trees. So I was just trying to figure out like, how do we tie some of this together?
And see, that's one of those things, Kristen, I didn't even know that, right? So I mean, it's not even on my radar. I mean, my thought was, you know, at a minimum, how are we just helping to say, maybe we, like Friends of Grand Rapids Park, through all your programs, could we just do a tree planting in these 5 homes, right? Provide them with resources and help them understand the benefits of the tree canopy. And that's kind of the extent of it, right? Versus what is almost probably on the opposite end of the spectrum that you just said that I wasn't really aware of, in terms of, you know, is that something that we should consider? So I think it would be great if you put it on here, you know, and I think it's like, I don't know. And if it doesn't fit somewhere, just, you know, review draft policy language. Maybe you could just drop in there and say, right, we already have where we intentionally decided not to regulate trees on, you know, those properties. And then at least it's on here and we could circle back with you and say, you know, how would you even feel about looking into that? And you might say, here's my 3 reasons. Absolutely no, I don't think this is a good idea.
Well, to be clear, a strategic decision wasn't me or the planning department. It was community when we were doing the engagement work associated with the tree canopy and the urban forestry committee. They decided it was not tolerable for us to extend our regulations onto single and 2-family homes. So,
and you mean for like the construction, right? How when we do construction for commercial, don't they have to replace their tree canopy if they cut down so much?
yes, so it's a complicated ordinance, but there's first and foremost, we want those trees protected, right? That's there for anything beyond 3 units or above. But if they're going to reduce trees, and we want to know what trees are being taken out, and then making sure that we don't dip below the required tree canopy. If it's a completely vacant site devoid of trees, then they are required to plant trees. So there's a few layers there, but through those conversations with the urban forestry, we didn't think we could get, they didn't think we could get it past the finish line if we started imposing regulations on what people could and couldn't do on their own property relative to trees. So.
Yeah, that could very well still be the stance. And we might even say, for purposes of this pilot, we might just flag it and say, we're not even going to really pursue that one right now, but hey, we can put it over here in the, right, like in the bike rack and say, at least we know there's an option for it in the future.
Yeah. We've also had conversations about parking lots, that we require all parking lots and storage areas to be impervious. And so all of the rainwater, stormwater has to be collected in the gray infrastructure. And, you know, even driveways have to be paved. And I know that there's a lot of advocacy for stone driveways. But we also have the code compliance end that would say never in our lifetime would we want that. So there's just all those balances. So I guess my point was that there's so much site implications and work that we're doing. Should those be identified as well, or do we just kind of separate these out?
I think it would be really helpful. And for me, I'm not, you know, I'd lean to you for what you recommend. I don't know if there's, you know, a staff person or 2 staff people that you want, you know, Jen and I can come over and we can have a meeting just to kind of brainstorm and collect more of that information. You know, I'm not trying to put onus on your team that they have to go fill it into some matrix. But I don't, you know, if there's particular staff that you're like, hey, meet with this person for an hour, meet with this person for an hour, you know, brainstorm, and you could just bullet point like a couple things, like, don't forget these things. And we could have those conversations.
Okay.
And, you know, if you have a different approach you want us to pursue, let us know. But yeah, the things that already that you've mentioned are just things that I'm not even aware of, right?
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, I would have been sitting over here by myself thinking, yeah, from a resilience perspective, you know, pervious paving and all of that. And we, you know, we have to do that. And it's so great. And then you're like, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a balance. But then I realize that you're talking about the buildings, and I'm sort of alluding to the site constraints, or not constraints, the site implications. So
I'd like to do, we're mostly trying to focus on the building, but right, I talked about trees. So that's right, obviously a little outside. I talked about recycling, because I'm also just trying to like wrap in holistically kind of I don't want to call it lower hanging fruit, but some things that just feel like they could go well in this project. So the driveway would be a perfect example.
Yeah. And then the other is probably more relevant for this entire team is, I really think that we need to be cognizant and look to other communities, because when I hear about additional regulations and requirements, although I'm completely supportive for the record of what we're trying to do, but it's my job to think about what does that do to property values? What does that do to investment opportunities? Would a developer make a choice not to invest in the city of Grand Rapids because the codes are so expensive and cumbersome that they'd rather look to develop in Columbus, Ohio, or Minneapolis or somewhere else where the code restrictions are not as cumbersome or expensive? And so it would just be helpful to make sure, whether that's working with investors, and I don't know what I don't know, but what I do know is when we have zoning regulations that create a level of uncertainty or increased cost, it's automatically a black strike against us when developers are making decisions as to whether or not they want to locate their headquarters in the city of Grand Rapids, right? So John O's incentive programs are one thing, but if it takes them 3 years to get through the city for zoning approval processes, or we have a reputation of a building department that makes it so impossible to build, they want to go elsewhere. So I would want to understand how these kinds of changes, although they benefit one, what's the implication to the other? So whether that's conversation with investors or just doing a little bit of research from a national perspective to see whether it is in fact a disincentive, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the cost of doing business. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the comment that you made, Allison, about, did you say Atlanta maybe created this program and then didn't staff it? And, I think one thing, and Kristen, you know this because you've been in the same meetings I have, one thing that Grand Rapids has going forward in spades is people love doing business here because we do business well, right? And so I think we don't recognize enough or often enough maybe the product that we have, right? That people want to do business here, and the cost is important, but sometimes being able to get something done quickly is more important than the cost of it, right? Because the longer it takes something to get something done, the more carrying costs there are. And so in anything that's done, any new thing that we do, we have to make sure that there are resources dedicated to it to make, I'm concerned about that with the work that we're doing, right? We're going to create this new stuff, and it's important and it's good, and I think it's going to make a difference. But if the result of it is that it just adds 6 months to development timelines, it's going to be a disaster, right? If we can make progress while keeping development timelines the same, I think we're going to be in a really good spot, even if it drives up costs a little bit.
Yeah, that's good to know. And John, I'll say there might not be anything more to put on here other than the matrix that we've talked about, right? You might just kind of be like, check, that's the main thing, but.
Yeah, I think I have some stuff, at least for you to be aware of. The one question I did have was about the timeline of that, right? Because we're trying to implement that by beginning of fiscal 23. And I don't know, I know you're not going to be done with this work, obviously, at that point in time. We're developing something that will change over time as we learn more and learn from implementation, as well as develop new policies and programs, et cetera. I don't know if you have any concerns about the timeline that we're on relevant to this work.
I don't, so just for my partners, right? I mean, I think I briefly have mentioned, but thankfully Jono and the team has invited me to be a partner on a tool that they're developing to evaluate projects to provide incentives to. And so it's not a, you have to meet this to get this. It's a, let's just evaluate these types of things to better understand. And so they've given me the opportunity with our city's commitment to sustainability to include some, climate change things in there. So we're in the process of working through that. And so to Jono's point, looking to roll that out probably June, July of next year is when that will be rolled out, just to start, getting that information and allowing it to help inform decisions. It can't make a decision, inform decisions. But
well, it will potentially change the level of incentive.
Oh,
right.
Right.
We are attaching monetary value to the performance, but it isn't like there's going to be a bunch of things, right? And it's not like you have to do every single one of them. We're evaluating the totality of the project.
So I actually think just happenstance, the timing works well, because I like the idea that that's ahead of the curve, so we can learn some things and get some feedback from some of the development projects to see, like, if nobody is using it or clicking any of those, right? I mean, that's going to be some pretty clear feedback for us to be aware of. Versus if there are some things that people seem to be checking more often, okay, you know, maybe that helps inform us as to what appears to be a little more palatable, right, for the development community. And one other thing that I would just make an ask. So we are intending to, and Sherry's been working, like, you know, trying to get the Sam Cummings of the world and different organizations like that, right, involved in some of the education that we've done and building performance standards as a potential policy. So I'd really appreciate if you guys are willing, or help me think through reaching out and encouraging some of those folks to participate in particular activities that we have, because we don't want to, I don't want to come forth and say these are supported and then have the development community all go and tell you that they hate it, right? And they're never going to do it. Like, I need to be aware of that and have that be a part of our conversation as we're going. And also, I think it would be helpful for me, quite frankly and transparently, with the environmental community, to have Kristen and Jono, both of you, to an extent, share what you already share, right? Because sometimes I get this like, well, how is it, you know, not that important to you from an environmental perspective that you require decarbonization? And people just don't understand the reality of what you just shared about our business community and those things. And I'm happy you can either provide me a couple things that we can weave in, and maybe we can just highlight a couple points here and there where you could come and kind of participate and help share from your perspective the implications of trying to do this work, because I think that that is a very important piece that I don't want to get missed.
Well, thank you. And I'm not like an environmental destroyer by any means. It's just like trying to understand the balance of things. That's why I'm
It's
vocal,
all
I guess.
Kristen's fault. Every time I don't get to do something, it's her fault. But it's really hard. I can't be mad at her because she's nice and we enjoy drinking wine together. So I'm like,
It's true.
Every time she puts her hand up, I just want to have the power to be like, no, put it down. No.
Don't say anything. I know. Sorry, I'm blunt in my communication, but I don't, like I said, I want to be a partner with you, Allison, and I don't want to get, you know, to the 11th hour and have my team, because we will likely have some pushback, and I'd rather have those conversations along the way than later on down the road.
Absolutely. And perhaps I didn't make it clear enough in the beginning to kind of like, but that's why I wanted to have the conversations now, to be getting staff's like feedback and thoughts on some things that I just don't understand or have awareness of.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get down that road. And Kristen, I think maybe Jen, Annabelle, and I could meet with, whether it's you, Tyler, Layla, or others, because I just, you know, I kind of put it out there and I never wanted to be presumptuous about like how or what of any of this fits into the master plan process, right? So I've tried to say before, like, I understand we don't co-op your process, and I get that. So how do we just, are there appropriate places where we can weave in, and what is that, so we plan appropriately for it and around it? And so we'll schedule something with you just specific to that topic, so that we're aware of that and can understand, you know, what the realities are there versus what's not possible.
Yeah, I think Tyler's welcome as well, but definitely Layla. We can fold in these engagement processes. We had a conversation this morning at community development with Commissioner Lanier, and really making sure that we're being respectful of our community and not having multiple engagement efforts, because the reality is the community isn't going to differentiate between your process and my process. So we might as well run them concurrent, so it's convenient, even if some of the feedback is only applicable to what you're working on, and some of it's only applicable to what I'm working on. And then it's yours and my job to separate out where that feedback goes. So yes, I do think that there's definitely opportunity for us to run our processes concurrent.
And I think even, you know, we started having the conversation, but so I have a better understanding of my team, and maybe Jen and Annabelle already know, but right, even with respect to actually like the zoning ordinance, what are some of the key possibilities there, right? Knowing that this process is already moving and a part of it, I don't want to develop everything else when perhaps that's the best tool to use, and we just need to recognize that and let that process play out.
Yeah.
You know, density and parking and all those things are things that come to mind for that.
Yep.
So.
Hey,
Tyler?
Allison. Yeah, I got one quick question. On the 5 homes that you guys are gonna be working on this summer to be more energy efficient. Have you guys looked at possibly doing an appraisal beforehand? And then one asked after the investment's made to see if you're dollar for dollar, or is your investment 50 cents on the dollar on your return on investment? I know it's long term, but is an impact upfront for that first property owner who's going to pay that $30,000? What's the true value of that in return over X amount of years? Might be beneficial to know what those numbers are, so that we all kind of know, does this plan work? I mean, is this something that we really want to take a look at moving forward with? Or is it, I mean, if you're investing $30,000 in an $80,000 house, does it really make sense to do that? Or does it make sense to demo that property, unfortunately, and then build a duplex that's more energy efficient? I don't know what those answers are, but might be something to just take a look at.
That's a really good point. So, because something like that came up in a conversation for me, actually, with a Bazzani project, where it was that they were like, look, we got this through the land bank, and to do this, it would cost us this much money versus if we just, demolish the whole thing, or if we've just purchased a different property that's basically the same, amount, but how much better of a property you get for it. So great point, Tyler. I appreciate it. Jen, we should make sure to add to here. I mean, I think that's working with Paula, right? And the assessor, they oversee the appraisals. Yes, thank you, Kristen. Still learning a lot about all of our departments because I don't come from city ops. So that would be really helpful. Yeah, I do know that we passed some legislation in Michigan that excludes the increased appraised value due to solar panel installation from property taxes. So that was something that was done. But a huge equity concern for all of this work is, and Kristen shared with me, like anytime you do an improvement to anything, the value is going to go up, right? Like, what does that mean for the tenant? And I'm really trying to think through, right? I mean, how do we look at that? How do we plan for that? And is there anything that we can do to help protect those residents?
Jono can put the whole city in an NEZ, I think.
No, actually, I can't. Legislatively, I'm not permitted to. Sorry.
I don't even know. What's NEZ?
It's a tax abatement program,
Oh,
but it's limited to like a certain percentage of the land area of the city. So
is that even anything that we can even, not the whole city, but that we can even look at for this?
we have existing areas already that are in, Baxter, West Side, Turner Gateway. There's a handful of others. I mean, we could create more. I don't think it's the right program though.
No, sorry, I was joking.
That's
Just
why
about
I
the
just
tax
mean, like,
capture and holding values and
all the things that I don't know. So for the existing NEZ programs, Jonna, will you throw that in the sheet? If that's something we should just.
Thanks, Kristen.
But you said it's existing, right? So it's not going away. I'm not saying new ones. I'm saying know of the ones that we have and whether it applies or doesn't apply, right? Because if we have the opportunity to select, how and where we're going to try to pick the households, that might be something important to know. If I, just have your map and can see it. I'm not saying I'm going to ask for anything else other than that, but I'm not going to say I'm not. But
all right, I'll do that. I got to run.
All right, thank you. Kristen, keep adding things like that I don't know about. Tell me who to ask.
all right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate all your help.
All right.
Bye,
We'll talk to
Tyler.
you
It was
later.
nice to
Take
meet you.
care.
Bye, all.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Bye.